There's something about darkness. It can get your heart pumping, your mind swirling, your hands, your palms all sweaty. And as adults, we're like, I'm not scared of the dark. That's a child's thing. Right? As a kid, you walk down the steps to a dark basement, the light switch doesn't work, the light bulbs burn out, and that basement, it is filled with fear when it's dark, isn't it? As a child, right, you go to bed, your mom or dad turn off the bedroom light, and right when that light goes on, that's where the monsters creep out from underneath the bed. It's easy as adults. We're like, oh, darkness, that's a child's fear. I'm an adult. I'm not scared of the dark at all. But is that true? Last fall, we had a bear that came visiting us at night, got into our trash several times. And I remember after one of his visits, the next night, my dog Lola, she had to go potts, and I'm like the person in her house that takes her potts. And so it was late at night, I clipped on her leash, I opened the front door, and right when I took a step out, something that I've done hundreds and hundreds of times, all of a sudden fear gripped me because it's dark. And the night before, the bear had just been there. Well, I made my way out in the front yard. I was trying to hurry Lola up, and she was not in a hurry at all. And all of a sudden, I heard some wrestling from the side yard, and I literally thought to myself, oh, the bear's there. And the bear is going to come after not Lola. The bear's going to come after me. He's going to eat me, and that's how I'm going to go out. I mean, it was like heart racing, palms sweaty, mind swirling. And all of a sudden, I was like, come on, Lola, let's go, let's go. I'm looking at the side yard. Well, obviously, the bear wasn't there that night. And I got back in the house safe. But here's what's interesting about the dark, whether you're a child or an adult. With one light, that fear goes away, doesn't it? The light comes on in the basement. Basement's not that scary anymore. The sun comes up in the morning, and guess what? The front yard's not as scary. The side yard, where I thought the bear was, not as scary. For that child in the bedroom, turn the light switch back on, the monsters go back underneath the bed. What's interesting is one light dissipates the fear connected to darkness, doesn't it? Back in the fall, I had an opportunity. I had a business meeting in Atlanta, Georgia. So I worked out all my travel arrangements, and the best flight I could find got me into Atlanta right around 11:30 p.m., almost midnight. So I knew at that time of night, I was like, well, I'll just get a Lyft or an Uber from the airport to, kind of the general area I was going to have my meeting the next day. Before I even left my home, I checked on my Lyft app, my Uber app, and it was like about $20 from the airport to that part of Atlanta that I needed to go, which I was like, not bad, especially that late at night. I flew from Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C., and when I landed there, I had a little bit of time, and I looked on my Lyft app and my Uber app, and it was still about $20 from the airport to that part of Atlanta that I needed to get to. But by the time I landed in Atlanta, got my luggage right around midnight, I opened up my Lyft and Uber app to, get a car. And, prices had surged. It was up over $100 for that ride. And I was like, there's just no way. Well, in the past, I'd taken MARTA, public transportation, and I was like, I'm not paying over $100 for a ride. And so I got a MARTA ticket for $3 and got on the train. As I was traveling on the train, I opened Google Maps because I had to find out exactly which station I needed to get off on and then what my route was from the station to my hotel. So I found the right station and found the right kind of route, and it was going to be almost a mile walk from that train station to my hotel. But I was like, what else can I do? The train stopped. I got off the train, grabbed my suitcase and my computer bag, and I started to make my way to my hotel. Now 1 a.m. But at 1 a.m., the city was still alive, and I was walking on big sidewalks with big street lights. I saw several police officers drive by. I felt really, really safe, and all of a sudden, Google Maps had me take a left. I made a left, and I started walking over a bridge, and the bridge spanned another major road, and as I got to the other side of the bridge, I realized something. That bridge was leading me into a park. This park had no lights, none at all. It was pitch dark. I found myself walking along this little path trees and shrubs everywhere. And my heart started to race. My palms got sweaty. My mind started swirling. I literally was thinking to myself, oh, this is how I'm going to go out in life. My wife, my kids will never see me again. I'm never going to make it out of the park. What seemed like forever, all of a sudden, I could see some light at the end of this pathway. I crossed one road, made one quick turn, and my hotel was there. And the light seemed so bright. It's amazing how in the midst of darkness, one light changes everything. Well, we're in this series titled Beyond, and it's a series really focused about how you and I, can live an exceptional life. In fact, Jesus said these words in John chapter 10. John chapter 10, he says, I've come so that you may have life and have it to the full. And that word full can be translated as abundant or excess or beyond. And Jesus desires for you and I to experience this type of life, for you and I to live a life beyond our comprehension, the one life that you and I have to live. Jesus goes, hey, I want you to live that. It's why I came, so you can experience that type of life. Do you believe that? Really? Do you really, really believe that you can experience that type of life? Well, in the Gospel of John, Jesus makes 7 very specific statements that build the framework, the form in which he says, hey, live within this framework and you're going to be able to experience this type of life. These 7 statements found in the Gospel of John is going to guide us throughout this series and into Good Friday, and I'm even going to touch on one of them, Easter weekend. So let's jump into the second one. We're going to be in John chapter 8, and let's just start here in verse 12. When Jesus spoke again. Now, the word again is one of those words that we have to highlight. One of those words that is be so easy for us to kind of skip over and just ignore. But these are the words that, I always want to encourage and challenge people to say, you need to pause and you need to ask yourself the question, like, what was happening before? Because obviously John wanted us to go, okay, Jesus again, right? There's something continuing, and we should ask, what was that? Well, this gets connected back to John chapter 7. And what was happening in John chapter 7 was one of the top 3 of the Jewish feast or festivals. You see, for the Jewish faith, there's 3. There's a lot of festivals, by the way, but the top 3, the most important ones, sometimes they're called the pilgrimage festivals, are Passover, Pentecost, and Sukkot. Now, Passover all gets connected to the celebration of when God sent Moses to free his people out of captivity in Egypt. So Passover is all about now these 12 tribes that were in captivity now coming into freedom, and God was going to form them into a mighty nation. The next festival is what was called Pentecost. If you've ever read Acts chapter 2, you've heard of Pentecost. Pentecost is simply 50, and it comes 50 days after Passover. So it always comes 50 days. And Pentecost gets connected to the celebration of when God gave Moses the law, the Torah. This is a huge celebration. So Passover is about the freedom of, getting them out of captivity. 50 days later, God gives them, through Moses, his law. And then the third of the major festivals is one that's called Sukkot. Now, Sukkot has different names that gets attached to it. Sometimes it's called the festival or the Feast of Tabernacles. Sometimes it's called the Feast of Booths. And it might be interesting, but those are almost all the same words. See, Sukkot means hut or booth or tent. That's what tabernacle means, tent. And so it's this celebration that in the 40 years where the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness, they didn't have a home. God was trying to lead them to the promised land where they could, set up a permanent home. But through their decisions, they kept wandering. And so it was the season of Well, temporary residences where they would set up camp and tear it down and move. Set up camp, tear it down and move. In fact, God, with his commands, dwelt in the tabernacle, this massive tent that they would set up and tear down as they would go from place to place to place. And this celebration, this feast, really focused on remembering God's provisions and celebrating his presence because God fed them during this wilderness wandering. And oh, by the way, God led them. Fire by night. He would lead them to where he wanted to take them. And understanding that this is going on in the background. I mean, we're in Jerusalem. This feast, this festival had consumed the city. In John chapter 8, John tells us, he goes, when Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, and this is what Jesus said, I am. Now, we looked at this in part 1. For you and me, some 2,000 years later, we put ... after that, and then we all will lean in. I am what, right? I am tired, I'm excited, I'm stressed, I am what? There's whatever comes after I am is the most important word. But for the Jewish people, I am gets connected all the way back to this moment where God reveals his holy, his sacred name. I am, this verb to be. God shifts it from the first person, I am, to the third person, which is the Hebrew word is Yahweh. So for the Jewish audience, the Jewish culture, when Jesus emphatically said, I am, they would have it would have got their attention and they would have leaned in. And Jesus says, I am the light. This image of light, something that 5,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, today, or 2,000 years from now, no matter your social economic status, no matter the part of the world you live in, no matter the language you speak, no matter the level of education you have, the light, we all grasp what light is, don't we? And Jesus says, I am the light of the world. The world. You see, for the Jewish people, they thought the promised Messiah was just for them. Even though over and over again, God tried to paint this picture that he was doing something so much greater. Over and over again. All the way back to Abraham, your descendants will be as numerous as the stars. God was leading through his ultimate plan of redemption for all people. And Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Whoever. And don't miss this. You're a whoever. I'm a whoever. He goes, whoever follows me. You see, your faith journey is a journey. Your belief, your trust in Jesus is about living that out in action. You see, in part 1, we looked at the I am statement, I am the bread of life. Jesus, used, again, another very, very common everyday item, something that would span the course of time, bread. And he's like, hey, I'm the bread of life. And then he goes, whoever comes to me will never grow hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. So he's like, hey, place your belief in me. Place your trust in me. Place your faith in me. And now he goes, hey, I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me puts their faith, their belief into action. Again, faith journey is all about you following Jesus as the leader of your life. He goes, whoever follows me will never walk in darkness. Again, a concept No matter your age, you understand the impact of darkness, don't you? We'll never walk in darkness, but we'll have the light of life. You want to experience life? Abundant life? Life in excess? Life beyond? But Jesus goes, there's the light of life, but you got to follow me, Jesus said. You got to put your faith into action. And then we're told in verse 13, the Pharisees, the Jewish religious leaders, challenged him. Now, it's going to feel kind of interesting because all of a sudden Jesus had just made this emphatic statement, another I am statement, and it's going to feel like he just completely abandons it. It's going to feel like he's just like, oh, I'm going to go this direction. Well, the Pharisees are trying to get him off topic, but what Jesus does so masterfully is what feels like a detour is actually going to be a teaching that's so foundational. You see, what the Pharisees are bringing up is something that happened back in John chapter 5. Now, you can read that interaction, which will help give you insight to what they're trying to get at. But the Pharisees were always trying to trip Jesus up. The Pharisees were always trying to trick Jesus. The Pharisees were always trying to get Jesus to say something that he would go against himself. I mean, they were always trying to, get Jesus. And so this is one of those moments. And so they challenged Jesus based off something that Jesus had said before. So they challenged him. And they said, here you are, appearing as your own witness. Your own testimony is not valid. Well, in John chapter 5, Jesus kind of said, well, my own testimony is not valid. He literally said that. So they're just taking his words and shoving them in Jesus' face. And Jesus was always ready for the gotcha. And what they're trying to trap him into, what they're trying to trick him, what they were trying to get him with, Jesus was going to take and, elevate what it meant that he was the light of the world. So Jesus answered, even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid. For I know where I came from and where I'm going. But you have no idea where I come from or where I am going. And this would have confounded them because all of a sudden he was like, yeah, it is valid. And you have no idea who I am really. You judge by human standards. I pass judgment on no one. Now, what Jesus says next, he's like, but if I do judge, but yet he just said he doesn't judge. What Jesus is saying is, I don't judge by your human standards. There's a different standard because where I come from, you have no idea. We're operating in two vastly different hemispheres, right? Jesus is like, hey, you just don't get it. But you judge by human standards. I don't. There's a different standard. And he's going to unpack this. He goes, but if I do judge, my decisions are true because I'm not alone. And this all gets connected back to this whole idea of testimony. He goes, I'm not alone. I stand with the Father who sent me. That the Father has put me on mission. That I'm doing the Father's will. In your own law, Jesus says, it is written that the testimony of two witnesses is true. That you have to have two, can't have one, you have to have two. And Jesus goes, I am one who testifies for myself. My other witness number two, is the Father who sent me. That my Father sent me, and he is the second witness. So I've checked off the check mark of your law. Then they asked him, where's your Father? And I love this question because, again, they have no idea. what to really ask Jesus. They're kind of lost. They thought they were going to stump Jesus, and now they're completely stumped. They thought they were going to confuse Jesus, and now they're completely confused. They thought they were going to get Jesus, and now they have nothing else to ask him other than, well, who's your father? Where is your father? Can you share a little bit more about your father? And Jesus says, you do not know me or my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. And once more, Jesus said to them, I'm going away, and you will look for me, and you will die in your sin. I mean, all of a sudden, Jesus now just cranks it one more level. I mean, at one point, they're talking about testimony, and another point, they're talking about fathers, and now Jesus just goes, hey, where I'm going, you can't go. You're going to die in your sin. Feels kind of hopeless. And this made the Jews ask, will he kill himself? Is that why he's saying all of this? Again, they're so confused. They have no idea which end is up or down or sideways. I mean, they have no idea what to ask him. But Jesus continued, you are from below, and I'm from above. You are of this world, and I am not of this world. I told you this, that you would die in your sins. I mean, that should have got their attention. That should have caused them to lean in. That should have made their heart race, their mind swirl, their hands get sweaty, but yet they were so focused in and trying to trap Jesus. And Jesus is like, you've missed what I'm saying and where I'm leading you and what's most important to you. He goes, I told you that you would die in your sins if you do not believe that. And then this would have been a deafening statement that I am. In our modern English Bible, they include the word he, but in the ancient Greek, what Jesus would have said, he wasn't there. That Jesus says, believe that I am. And every Jew would have known what Jesus was referring to. That I am he. You will indeed die in your sins. Because listen to what they asked him next. He goes, who are you? Who are you? You see, they understood what Jesus just said. They thought he was just a good teacher, a good rabbi. But Jesus just declared that he was God. They're like, who are you claiming to be? Just what I've been telling you from the very beginning, Jesus replied. I have much to say in judgment of you, but he who sent me is trustworthy. And what I have heard from him, I tell the world. They did not understand that he was telling them about his Father. So Jesus said, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he. Now, Jesus pulls in this Old Testament story connected to Moses. Remember, Moses was the number one prophet for all the Jewish people. I mean, it was Moses, and there's a story about Moses grabbing a snake, and when he held it up in the air, it turned into a staff. It's a powerful moment. It gets connected back into John chapter 3 as well, and Jesus goes, hey, when I am lifted, when I am exalted, when I am lifted high, know that I am he, that I am, and that I do nothing on my own, but speak just what the Father has taught me. The one who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, for I always do what pleases him. I mean, think back to part 1 when I read those words from Deuteronomy chapter 31. That God is out in front of us, and that he is beside us, and that he is for us. So do not be afraid. Do not fear. And Jesus is like, hey, my Father is with me. He has sent me. He has not left me alone. And I am doing his will. And even as he spoke, many believed in him. You see, Jesus was so intentional with his teaching. He seized moments, even when people were trying to attack him, to help people understand his ultimate purpose, his ultimate mission was to do God's will. You see, I think about this image of a light. And Jesus started off by saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me. Remember, the bread was about believing and coming to Jesus and believing, having trust, having faith in him. Now Jesus goes, but I'm the light. You got to follow faith in action, belief in action, trust in action. He goes, whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Life to the full. Life beyond. Now, there's a couple insights. Because when you take this theme of light throughout the Bible, it starts to paint such an incredible picture. And this is not the entire picture, but I wanted to pull out several very important themes connected to light. Because remember that Jesus is the light. You see, what we have to understand, there's light versus darkness. I mean, this is one of those themes throughout the Bible. And to this day, we understand light versus darkness, don't we? But at the very, very beginning of the Bible, in Genesis, God is just about ready to create. And what did he create first? Well, he separated light from darkness. And listen to what God called light. Have you ever paid attention to this? God saw that the light was what? Good. And God is the definition of good. He saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. Was darkness good? No. Light was good. It's a foreshadowing of what God knew what was going to come. Remember, God knows all, sees all, in all, through all. He knew what was going to come. And he goes, hey, light is good. Darkness isn't. We have to understand that darkness is waging war. From the moment sin entered this world, darkness entered this world. It's waging a war. Some 5,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, today, and 2,000 years in the future. We have to just recognize that there is a war being waged, and darkness is trying to do everything it can to consume you. That's why Paul, writing this letter to the church in Ephesus, he writes, he goes, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of what? Against the powers of what? Against the powers of the dark world. Because that's the battle. There's a spiritual battle. There's darkness that's trying to take people's souls, to crush them, to break them. He goes, hey, there's a battle. You need to recognize it. And against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. In fact, this amazing chapter, Ephesians 6, maybe you've never read it before, you should. Maybe you haven't read it for a while, you should, because it's about the armor of God. How do you protect yourself from this spiritual battle where darkness is trying to conquer? But remember, there's hope. Why is there hope? Because Jesus illuminates the darkness. Hey, Christ followers, if you're living life without hope, I'm just telling you, hope has a name. Jesus has overcome. Jesus illuminates the darkness. In fact, at the very beginning of this gospel, John chapter 1 is a great, one of the best introduction to who Jesus is. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then John, I can just imagine him sitting down years later, scripting out this opening at everything he knew about Jesus. And all of a sudden he writes these words. He goes, the light shines in the darkness. I mean, John, who walked with Jesus. John, who saw Jesus crucified. John, who saw Jesus alive. And John, who gave his life to the mission that Jesus came for all people to know him. And John writes, the light shines in the darkness. And the darkness hasn't overcome it. The darkness hasn't won. You see, we got to understand that light ultimately wins. The darkness is trying to do everything it can. It's trying to steal your joy. Darkness is trying to overcome you. And it's like, no, the darkness, Jesus is the light. And the light ultimately wins. In the book of Revelation, and towards the very, very end of Revelation, chapter 1 is all about the risen King Jesus, this amazing image. Chapter 2 and 3 of Revelation is all about the church. And then chapters 4 to the end is all about what's to come. And we're given this description, that the city, and this is in the future, risen King Jesus, darkness is gone. The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it. For the glory, the radiance of God gives it light, illuminates it. And the Lamb, who is Jesus, is the lamp. The Lamb, Jesus, is the lamp. You see, which connects to this last insight. The church is the carrier of the light. The church, a gathering of people. In Revelation 2 and 3, churches have lampstands. Jesus' presence, when Jesus is there, he's the light. And that we as a church are carriers of the light. We're not the light itself. Jesus is the light. But Jesus also said in Matthew chapter 5, he goes, you are light of the world. Why are you the light? Because when you place your faith, your belief, your trust in Jesus, when you follow Jesus, you carry the light to everyone. You're on mission with Jesus to tell everyone. You see, Jesus is the light of the world. Jesus is the light of the world. Whoever follows, lives their life in step with Jesus. Whoever loves and lives and leads like Jesus and leaves behind what Jesus left behind, which is more people who loved and lived and led like him. Are you going to be the carrier of his light? Are you going to be the carrier? Because what matters now is that people place their faith, their trust in Jesus so they can experience a light that conquers the darkness in our world, but the darkness also within us. Because all of us are saved by God's grace when we place our faith, our trust in Jesus. That light conquers the dark. Let me pray. Lord, I thank you for who you are. Lord, may we understand, grasp the importance of carrying your light. the light that shines within our soul, the light that illuminates this world. In your name I pray.